is make the packaging out of recycled plastic. Most of the time the fish will be approaching a jig head from kind of this. I've got some samples of failed attempts. Maybe that was the first one, then that. Well, we've only got standard jig heads now, there's a lot more that you want to use. So read into that what you will.
What are you most proud of about your little creation? Now let's get into this because this video is eye-opening. Not only has it got a bunch of information that will make you a better fisherman, but it's going to give you a good insight into what it took for a product, or to develop a product that immediately went to #1 when it was released onto the Australian market. Now, you would have, excuse me, heard of companies and even tackle stores saying things like, this lure is XYZ's company's version of that company's lure, and admittedly there is one company in Australia that, you know, has been known recently for hitting that metaphorical copy on the 3D printer of other brands' lures. Now, the truth is that most innovators in the fishing industry are not only tournament fishermen that spend heaps of time on the water and find deficiencies in the product that they're using, or they find gaps in the market that they think that they could fill with some sort of product. It's no secret that the guy that I'm about to introduce has been on the channel before, but has also arguably led the way in product development in the fishing industry over the last 3, maybe 4 years. The exciting thing for the fishing industry is not only the wealth of knowledge that this guy has got, but also the fact that the people that surround him are a really young team. So there is a lot to look forward to from the Daiwa development team. So this video is for those who want an insight into what it takes to make a product immediately shoot to #1 when it was released, the failed models, and why, if I was in Australia, would not be using any other jig head. Let's get into it. So talk to me about the flat spot on the side of it.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone's familiar with like Ned rigs from America. It's been the hot technique for 2 or 3 years now, which basically is just fishing a worm plastic, you know, on the bottom. And most, if not all, Ned heads would be a stand-up design basically, because you want to have that worm kind of vertical. And this was something where, you know, me and Chris were pretty vocal of at the start. Like I've used a lot of Ned heads, and I've bought, you know, Ned heads from America and tried all different kind of stuff. And Hickson actually jumped in the water and was kind of watching fish react to a plastic on the bottom and a jig head on the bottom. And what he noticed was when a plastic is completely 100% vertical, so like a proper Ned head, you know, most of them will sit basically exactly vertical like that. Obviously your line is coming off in this kind of direction, right? So a fish's lateral line is sensitive enough that it knows the line's there. It's not going to be sitting here because it'll touch the line and it'll get spooked. So most of the time the fish will be approaching a jig head from kind of this vicinity, either behind it or from the side. If they're approaching it from behind and it's standing up directly like that, unless they pin it to the bottom perfectly, like if they approach it from, like, say, a 45 degree and they pin to the bottom, well, that plastic tends to push over like that with the hook facing down. And you know, conversely, if they're approaching it from the side, you know, they've probably got a better chance of getting the hook. But what we kind of noticed was when the plastic was on an angle that's more of like a 45, the fish's ability to kind of eat the tail first all the way to the head cleanly was much higher than when it was completely vertical. So obviously it's a tricky balancing act to try and get a plastic to sit like that, because every plastic's different. Some are buoyant, some aren't buoyant. Soft bottom, you know, in an ideal world the bottom is flat and hard and it just sits like that. But in real world it's not that simple. But I guess what we aim to do with our design was to make something that gave it the best chance possible of sitting at that what we felt was the optimum angle, which is, you know, kind of close to a 45. So, you know, that flat spot is not a very like abrupt flat like some of the earlier designs were. Kind of very sharp edges that meant if it did fall over, it was hard for it to kind of centre itself, if you will.
So how did you do that with the ball? Talk to me. We spoke on the phone about this concept of everything being round because things roll on like a basketball.
Yeah.
Yeah, explain that to me.
Yeah, so I mean, what we kind of, obviously, our design is, you'd call it like a modified cylinder, essentially. You know, so we've got the flat bottom. What we wanted to make sure is that if, for example, it did fall over on its side, it's got the ability to roll all the way across, from hook point being down on one side, hook point being down on the other, with minimal interference. So what we didn't want was any kind of flat spots or anything anywhere to inhibit the ability for that to kind of fall the right way. There's so many variables to getting a jig head to sit like that on the bottom, but I guess what we're aiming to do is give it the best possible chance that in a normal fishing scenario, in normal conditions, it's got the best chance of sitting what we feel is the optimum angle, which is something like that. So when a fish approaches it from any side, they're pushing the hook down like that and not pushing it over, and forcing the hook point kind of upside down, if you will. And so we started soft plastics and jig heads at the same time.
Oh, really?
And that's how long it's taken to make jig heads. The first prototypes of lead on a jig head was probably late 2019, which is hook conformation samples. So basically, like first start of a jig head is deciding what hook you want to use. Obviously, there's heaps of brands of hooks out there that we could have used, or we did investigate going down like custom hook options as well. But yeah, first thing was literally just pour like a basic ball head onto a hook, just to actually fish with them a bit. So we was like no worm keeper, like no grub keeper on them, just a ball lead, and we were just super gluing bait junkies to them to check hook sharpness, strength, you know, what wire did we want to use, all of that kind of thing. So they would have been late 2019, and then from there it slowly progresses. Once you decide what hooks you want to use, then you start thinking about, you know, what shape do we want to make. And
BKK hooks.
Yes, ended up on BKK, 2 different versions, a light wire option and a heavy wire option. So myself, I like a light wire for a lot of my brim stuff and bass stuff. Like when I go out to Glenbourne and St Clair fishing plastics, I like a light wire because a lot of the time they kind of bite it a few times before they get the hook. So you want that penetration power of a light wire jig head. So
yeah. And how can you tell on the, is it these little numbers here?
Yeah, so 2X indicates heavy wire, and the packet where it says the quantity in the pack, 6 pieces, that'll be black, so that's a heavy wire hook. Yep. On a light wire, you'll see it 0X, and the black colour changes to light blue.
Okay,
like
so
a
two wire gauge options then.
Yep.
Yeah. 6 in a pack. That'll change with the sizes of the packs that you.
Yeah, like correct. Quantity per pack, like you know, a 1 ounce head is you know, 2 or 3 pieces per pack, depending on the hook size and stuff. So, well, let me try. I've got some samples of failed attempts.
Yeah, that's what we want to see. Does that interest people, right? These ones are all on
some
an angle.
random. That's another different one. That's the one with the wire in it. That's the double one. And then ended up with that.
So that wire is what cut.
That
cut plastics up.
Yeah. So like you played around with angles of it and thickness of the wire and stuff, and then eventually we got to that, and then eventually refined it to what's on the jig heads now.
To that. That looks like pretty similar to the first version that I saw.
Yeah. That would be what I gave you, would be that design.
Oh, really?
So this is all prior to that.
Yeah, wow, okay, got you.
So some of these go back to 2019. Maybe that was the first one, then that. Then we were like, let's put wire in it. And then we were like, that burns it up too much. So then we cut the front off, see if that helped. Then we were like, wire's too aggressive. Tried that. And then got to that. And then based off of that, I did a drawing and then started sampling it at the factory.
Why didn't you go with some of these earlier models? Just every single one of them had something different? Or?
We tested all of them in kind of real world fishing scenarios as well. We also cut, so basically we'd get a sample and cut the hook just behind the keeper, put plastics on them and kind of pull and just kind of gauge how well the keeper's held. I mean, I think we ended up on 27 different keeper designs. This is just a few of them here. There's probably 4 or 5 different versions of each one of those designs.
What are you most proud of?
I guess proud of the fact that we did it. In my opinion, we kind of did it the right way and differently. We took the time, as I said to you, like we started this at the same time we started soft plastics. Well, probably a little tiny bit afterwards, but it's taken us 3 and a bit years, or probably would be close to 4 years until they hit the shelves from when we first kind of thought we want to make some jigheads. It would have been very easy to make a standard jighead black nickel hook or a tin hook, standard kind of keeper design, standard head shapes, but I think we spent the time and kind of tried to do it different, and that put a lot of hurdles, like we'll talk about in a minute, with getting keepers to stick to shanks of hooks that are Teflon and all that kind of thing. But it's your 1%ers, like we could have made it like that, but we chose to make it a bit different.
Yeah, so tell me about that. Like, what challenges did you pop up? Like?
Yeah, I mean, so immediately, our keeper design is obviously quite different and unique. One little thing that I didn't even think of when we started this project is by cutting away so much of the lead on that keeper to get those big barbs at the front and the skinny shank, you remove a lot of weight from the keeper. And what that obviously means is you have to put more weight in the head to have a jighead that weighs 1/8 of an ounce. So when we first initially did that, our head sizes looked disproportionate to what else was out there on the market. Without knowing the difference between that keeper, you might think, oh, that looks like a heavy jighead. But realistically, it's the same weight, but the difference is it's more weight in the head, which conversely, when we started playing around with it, actually turned out to be a really good thing, because the buoyancy of bait junkie plastics, we obviously want the tail to sit up off the bottom. If you have a really big keeper with lots of lead on the shank, that's going to want to make that plastic fall flat on the bottom. So we actually investigated for a long time making the keeper out of plastic to remove all the weight from the shank, to get it always, like as much as possible sitting upright off the bottom. We ended up not going down that road because it was going to be too costly, because you'd have to do 2 different molds, 2 different pours. What we learnt from that is we learnt that we wanted a light keeper, because that helps the plastic stand up, and also by cutting out all that material is how we get the fact that the keeper holds the plastic so well.
Tell me about packaging.
Yeah, so I mean, again, kind of, you start the project and you just think, oh yeah, packaging, right? You'll just put it in a whatever. But then you start actually thinking about it, and this is kind of why I still commit to fishing a lot of tournaments and stuff like that, because it's not so much the tournament fishing for me, right? It's the fishing for 3 or 4 or 5 days in a row. If I go away for a tournament, I might go a couple of days early, fish somewhere nearby. So I fish 3, 4, 5 days in a row with minimal interruptions, and I can kind of zone in. And that's when I do a lot of thinking, either driving to the tournament or stuff like that, right? So I remember being on the water once, and I opened up my box and all my jigheads were rusty, because I don't have, the greatest commitment to making stuff clean and washing it before you put it away. So I'd obviously emptied a whole bunch of new jigheads into a box and then used one and chucked it in there, and then all the new ones become rusty, right? So I was like, it'd be great to be able to leave jigheads in a bag, and I use, I fish a lot of stuff from Daiwa Japan, and we have worm hooks and stuff that come in Ziplocs, and I was like, well, I store all my worm hooks in a Ziploc, why can't I store a jighead in a Ziploc? So it makes the package reusable, so you don't have to always be chucking it out all the time, whether you're storing jigheads in it or, whatever, hooks, swivels, sinkers, whatever, you can at least reuse something like that, so you're not constantly throwing it out. I think, trying to minimise our usage of plastic is important, and what we did do is make the packaging out of recycled plastic. Bait Junkie plastics now are made from recycled plastic packaging, so anytime we can do that kind of thing, try and make the package either reusable or made it from recycled material. And then obviously the next evolution will be trying to make, you know, some sort of environmentally friendly plastic alternative packaging, which is again, that's something I'm pretty passionate about, which hopefully will happen sooner rather than later. But we've got a lot of good people on it. But
so made of recycled plastic, so it's from recycled.
Yeah, correct. So this is
and can be recycled as well.
Yeah, so this is made from recycled a mix of different one, but it does contain quite a lot of ocean waste plastic as well, which is pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Talk to me about the sticker. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the sticker, right? So we haven't seen it really at all.
Yeah, so the first samples, the first samples at AFTA didn't have the item stickers on there because again they weren't finished yet. But yeah, it's like this is, you know, the idea of the removable sticker or the Macca's Monopoly style sticker. I was down in the warehouse working one day and this is just like a freight label that we send, you know, put on the boxes. I think it was probably packing something to send to you, but these have like a internal sticker part. And I was mucking around with it and I kind of thought to myself, well, that would be, imagine if that was on your packet and then you could pull that off and stick it to your tackle box or stick it to, you know, wherever. And I even made a mock-up of one. I sent a picture to the guy in Japan that was helping me with the project, and I was like, what do you reckon about something like this? And you know, we couldn't make it exactly like this because this has got like a border around it. We obviously on a packet that's that big, we don't have heaps of space because you want the text to be as, you know, big as possible so you can read it from a long way away. So kind of where we ended up was still that kind of two-piece design, but it hasn't got the border around it. The bottom of it, you can rip it off and reuse it and stick it onto a packet of onto your, you know, tackle box or whatever, and just rip it off and stick it on, and away you go. And then you're left with that, you know, with the barcode on the back. So the removable part is obviously the part. As fishermen, we want to know it's 1/6 from a retail store perspective. Like a lot of guys, when they sell out of the thing, they have a little tag behind it. You can stick one of them on from a packet that you've bought yourself or that they, you know, use as demos or something to know, I'm out of 1/6 1/0s, I have to buy some more of them. Yeah. So there's heaps of different uses for it, but
I noticed that as well. It's across the top. It's kind of like a
so like an anti-theft system. So obviously with the Ziploc bag, one of the downsides is the fact that you could just come and open the Ziploc and empty them. So wrapping the sticker around like that is our way of kind of making it at least semi-difficult to open.
So that was one challenge.
So, when you put this on something, it doesn't vibrate.
I thought it was my phone for a second.
No, it's mine.
But okay, so a second ago you talked about like the keeper moving around.
Yeah.
Like that was a challenge to try and fix it there, I assume. Like there would have been a few different things going on there.
Yeah, I guess it's I mean it's not a new problem. Anytime you have like a small bit of lead molded around a circular hook shank, you don't have a lot of surface area to stick the lead to.
Yeah.
And like most hooks are either, you know, a black nickel finish or a tin, you know, silver finish, and they have at least a little bit of, I guess, the lead can grip that surface a little bit.
Yeah.
We're using Saxas hooks, which is, you know, like a Teflon PTFE style coating of a hook, so like a non-stick pan, super slippery, really hard to get stuff to stick to it. Or when you start moulding, you know, an 8mm long bit of lead to it, it took us about a year to come up with a way that had the keeper stick to the shank to the point where you're not going to have a keeper move on one of these jigheads. You have to have a keeper design like that to grab bait junkie style material. So we knew we wanted that design, and so we just had to work through it. We couldn't say, well, okay, we'll just join the lead to the head to stop it spinning, because then you lose that ability to have the big claws at the front of the keeper that grip the plastic.
Okay, so you mentioned something before about the plastics ripping. When we were talking about these other ones, you were talking about taking plastics off and ripping them. Is that something that you guys have thought about? Is it
Yeah, there's obviously a trade-off, right? So gripping ability to be able to pull them off and re-rig them. There's a trade-off there of you can make it like one of those, the keeper with the wires coming out of it, which we thought of for a little while, grips the plastic, insanely well. And a wire keeper's not new. I mean, lots of jigheads just have a bent wire keeper, right? Yeah. And they hold plastics really well generally. I didn't like just the bent wire keeper because I don't like the separation between the wire and the shank of the hook. It's quite hard to get plastics to go over those wire keepers, in my opinion. So we experimented moulding it into the lead and stuff, but once you had that there, it was really hard to then remove the plastic without tearing it. And so kind of what we ended up with in our finished design was, something, those two front barbs grip the plastic really well, but because you've only got a small amount of material in front of that, you can kind of stretch the plastic down and pull it off, and stretch it up and pull it off without too much damage to the plastic. So if you do rig it incorrectly, you can kind of manipulate it to the point where you can fix it up and it still grips pretty well.
I guess that's the first question I got online about it was the hook keeper looks really awesome, but is it going to tear my plastics up every single time? Yeah. And I thought to myself initially, like, I don't care. I've got heaps of plastics, and then I thought, what about that kid that's got one box of jig heads?
So I think there's two things that I kind of learnt from it. Your ability to rig a plastic straight on a jig head, to me, was kind of directly related to how easy it is to start the plastic to slide over the keeper. If you try and rig your plastic up and it kind of all bunches up at the front of the keeper, it's very hard to notice if you've got it straight. Yeah. And if you've got it like roughly lined up to where the turn of the hook needs to come out. So that's why our keeper, we made it really kind of streamline at the front, so you could easily kind of push it over. And so if you can at least push it over to the point where the plastic is at the front barbs, you can visually get a representation of, I've cooked that, I've put it on crooked, or I've got it pretty good, before you go and commit to pushing it all the way over. That's kind of one thing I learnt from testing all the various different ones, was the easier it was to start it sliding over the keeper and get it kind of, because by the time you're 8-9 mil off the front of the head, if you've stuffed it up or not. Totally. If it's just got a little bit of a curve there, okay, I've pretty much got that, and if you eyeball it that way and it's straight, you should be able to commit to full send and just push it on and hope for the best. But as I said to you at the start, it's a trade-off for gripping ability versus being able to pull plastics on and off heaps of times and reuse them. Personally, I'd back myself to rig it straight, or straight enough to fish with, and then not have to worry about changing it for the rest of the day, than worried about ripping up a couple of plastics here and there. So
yeah, I get you.
Lots of failed attempts along the way.
So was it mainly you and Chris testing them, or did you have all your Daiwa anglers kind of come in on this project? Or?
Yeah, we had a lot of guys involved. When we'd get samples, we'd send them off to everyone to kind of have a play with, depending on the hooks and weights and everything that we were getting at the time. But Chris was kind of involved from the very beginning. He's super particular about his tackle, as I am, and we both kind of know, I think, what if it kind of works for both of us, if we kind of think it's good enough, I think that's a good measure of kind of if it's going to be successful for others. So Chris was very heavily involved and was a huge part in coming up with things like the keeper shape and stuff like that, and especially testing hooks, because if anyone's going to bend a hook, it's Hickson in an oyster rack. So he did a lot of the groundwork in testing it for us, and obviously myself and the guys here as well.
So the target or market there, so we talked about the bass, the brim, guess the Australia's tournament scene, it would be definitely with the higher stuff. Talk to me about what else you've got in the range.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think there's 96 different head sizes in the initial release, everything up to a 2 ounce 8.0. So I mean, I grew up not fishing for brim and bass. I grew up fishing, barramundi, snapper, threadfin salmon, that kind of thing. So we wanted to be relevant to everyone in Australia. You need everything from tiny brim trout jig heads through to stuff you'd use, offshore for snapper, cobia, kingfish, that kind of thing. So that was, at the start of the project, I was like, oh yeah, we'll just make 40th to 2 ounce. They'll be easy. That's just a range of jig heads. This is like our first try at a lot of this kind of stuff. So this is our first jig head. Bait Junkie was our first soft plastic. What happens when we've made 10 jig heads, 12 jig heads, 20 soft plastics? I'm learning more, as we're all learning more in terms of developing product and stuff. So one thing I didn't kind of appreciate was 96 jig heads is 96 different drawings. I thought it would be a case of, we know how much lead has a specific gravity. So if your jig head needs to weigh 7 grams and the shape you want to have is like this, then just go scale up, make it 14 grams. Well, you can do that, and we could have been done a year and a half ago if we did that way. But what I didn't appreciate was, you scale it up, for example, from a 1/6 to a 3/8, but then the area where your plastic butts up against is then too big for the plastics that you generally put on a 3/8 4.0. So then you have to go, okay, well, if that's going to be used on a 5-inch jerk shad, and a 5-inch jerk shad has a front end that's 10 mil in diameter, well, your jig head should be as close to 10 mil as possible, right? So then you have to start stretching the head this way, or you start making it oblong, so literally 96 different drawings thinking about, okay, that jig head is going to be used on these plastics, measure those plastics, get the measurements of them. Jig head has to fall between this and this. I think we did 3 runs of 3D prints, refining, because it's easy to look at a computer and go, oh, yeah, that's 10 mil by 8 mil by 6 mil, or whatever it might be. But then when you get it in your hand, 3D printed, you go, oh, and you put your 2.5 inch minnow or your 2.5 inch grub up against it and go, no, it'd be better if it was a touch, shorter or a touch fatter or something.
Yeah.
Then you go back to the drawing, adjust the render, 3D print again, check it again, that looks better, make a sample mold, check it with that, fish it. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Make the mass production mold. So
yeah, right.
It's a huge job. Yeah, the guys have fished them in New Zealand. We've got Daiwa New Zealand, obviously, over there. All the boys have got samples and stuff, and catching heaps of big snapper and kingfish, and doing all the heavy saltwater testing. A lot of heavy saltwater testing has been done over in New Zealand, just because you can go and catch 50 snapper in a day pretty easily over there. So,
where do you see the product line going? Like, where do you see it? You've got this release in January.
January. Bait Junkie Jigheads will be in shops. Probably a bit later than what we kind of originally anticipated, but to be honest, the response from the after show was kind of a bit overwhelming. And so to deliver everyone equally, we didn't want to cut anyone out, so we pushed the launch back to January. As I said, it's an extensive range we've got now, light wires, heavy wires, up to from 1/40th up to 2 ounce. I mean, but they still only cover what I would call a standard jig head, lead at the front kind of thing. There's a lot more types of hooks that I use and everyone else is using, and that's all stuff that we'll start investigating and planning for potential future introductions. Nothing set in stone yet, but you can make a million different jig heads. Chris has got some wild ideas about some weedless designs and stuff like that, which we're already playing with, but kind of nothing set in stone yet. I mean, we haven't spoken about Teflon in terms of like hooking ability or anything like that.
So talk to me about the hooks.
Easy segue. The reason we wanted a Teflon hook was for the same fact that we use Teflon hooks on all our lures now. You know, we use BKK Super Slides, which is a similar coating to Saxas, not exactly the same, but very similar. And it's the hooking ability, right? So if you have a Teflon coated hook, the fact that it slips through much easier. When you talk about kind of hooking potential of a hook, we're talking about how easy it is for it to slide past the barb. Because, you know, once you pass the barb, you're more than likely going to land the fish if you can get it past the barb. So that Teflon coated hook obviously being super slippery. I mean, I'm sure you've had tying a lure on or changing split rings, the Teflon coated hooks go in really easily.
I noticed it. I actually noticed it when I was just putting plastics on.
The ability for it to just slip through.
Slide through, yeah. That's when I noticed it.
I guess the side benefits of that, so I mean the main benefit of that is obviously it penetrates the fish's mouth easier, and so you don't have to put as much pressure into the hook set. It means things like where you maybe used to use a light wire hook, you can now use a heavy wire hook because it might act very similar to a non-Teflon light wire hook in terms of how easy it penetrates. So you get the penetration, but then you get the added strength of having a heavy wire hook. But like some of the, I guess, lesser known benefits of having it penetrate easier is things like less rolled tips. So I mean, we all do it. All hooks roll the tip from time to time, but if it can penetrate easier, it's putting less pressure on the hook point of that hook, and then you've obviously got less chance of rolling that hook point over and making it blunt to the point where it doesn't penetrate anything. So. I guess there's more than just the obvious benefit of not just the Teflon hook in these jigheads, but you know, again, it kind of goes back to what we said at the start. Like a jighead is a jighead; it's a piece of lead on a hook. But you can look at it very simply like that, or you can look at it and go, well, there's probably 5 or 6 ways I can improve that. You know, let's try and improve what is, you know, a piece of lead on a hook.